Chapter 11. Destiny's Diary. The morning after Destiny's death, Stephen received an unusual phone call from Betty Levasseur. Destiny had asked Betty to give something to Stephen when she died. Apparently, Destiny had a premonition of her death. Stephen agreed to stop by the Levasseur residence later that night. It was very late by the time she agreed to meet us, but Betty had to wait for Mr. Levasseur to pass out drunk. When we pulled up to the front of the house, it was completely dark. There were 2 streetlights on their road, but they were dim. Betty Levasseur was sitting on the front steps in the dark, her hair up, and dressed in a long white nightgown with pink slippers on her feet. A large filing box was sitting next to her. She began to walk down the 3 cement steps, balancing the box awkwardly under her arm. Stephen got out of the car and met her. Betty handed Stephen the box, turned, and went back inside the house without so much as a word. Stephen whispered his thanks and turned back toward Dan's car. In my head, I thought morbidly of how great it would have been if Betty had hacked Peter up into little pieces, putting them in the file box for us to dispose of. It's not like anyone would miss him. I suppressed the thought. When we arrived at Stephen's house, we hurried into the dining room and placed the box on top of Stephen's kitchen table in order to examine it. It was a featureless file box, tied shut with thick twine. We untied the knot and found inside many notebooks of various sizes and bindings. Stephen picked out one that had a big 5 on it and sat at the table. 5th grade, I guessed, quietly. There were multicolored sticky notes on many of the pages, indicating that those entries were especially important. We decided to start there. As Stephen read, Dan and I stood behind him, peering over his shoulders. Stephen opened one notebook to the first sticky-noted page and began to read aloud. February 5th. I don't like it when Daddy comes in my room at night. He hurts me sometimes. I don't like the games we play when Mommy's not around. Stephen's voice trailed off, and he looked at us in stunned silence. I don't feel right reading this, Dan said. Why don't we take a look at something more recent, I suggested, trying to pretend that I hadn't heard what Stephen had just read. Stephen looked in the box and pulled out a diary labeled with the words 8th grade written inside a big heart. That's when she began to change, Dan remembered. Yeah, Stephen said, still processing the last entry. That's when her dad left. He turned to one of the pink sticky notes stuck in the beginning of the diary and began to read. January 28th. Adam came over today. I just love him. We are going to be married one day. He is so good to me, and he's so nice. We do a lot of the same things that I do with Daddy, only it feels good with Adam. I get so happy whenever he's around. The next several pages had the name Destiny Medeiros written in different scripts. I smiled at the thought of Destiny as a love-struck junior high student. Damn, I said. She really liked him. Stephen was skimming quickly through the diary. Listen to this, he said, reading another entry out loud. April 16th. Today, Adam came over with a book he found while digging for old bottles in those slums his dad used to own. It belonged to some woman named Clara Bonney. Adam says it has a spell that will protect me from Daddy. I can't think of doing the spell. You have to do a lot of fucked up stuff for it to work. But Adam says it's high magic from an ancient Canaanite spell. He said I needed to perform it on someone close to me, like the Levite in Judges 19. I told him to put the book back. The next entry was in a clipped script, scribbled angrily across the page. April 18th. Today, Mom found Dad in my room. We were in the middle of his twisted little game. She yelled and got so mad at Dad that she kicked him out. She was swearing, but she said it was okay, that God wanted her to, and that Dad would burn in hell one day for hurting me. Stephen continued reading. April 23rd. Mom has been eating her old painkillers from her knee surgery from like 2 years ago. She never talks to me about Dad. I hope he dies a painful death for what he has done to Mom and me. Adam says I should perform the spell on him, but I still don't think it's a good idea. Stephen seemed overwhelmed. The whole time I'd assumed that Susan got into drugs because her husband left her," he said, "when all along it was because he was raping Destiny." I remembered how Susan had looked when I last saw her, and felt sick to my stomach. "What a bastard," Dan whispered. I picked up the book and flipped to another entry that was sticky-noted. May 12th. I saw my father today for the first time since Mom kicked him out. Mom was at work, and Adam was over, and I guess Dad let himself in using his old key. Adam hid in the closet when he heard him coming up the stairs, and he came into my room to say goodbye. He apologized for what he'd done to me, but then he started to touch me again. I screamed, and Adam came out and smashed a glass bottle over Dad's head. We dragged him into the bathroom, and Adam cut his throat with the bottle. Then we performed the spell that Adam had talked about. He had ripped that part out of the book before he reburied it. He's so smart. It was like the hand of God was on him. Adam put Dad's body in the bathtub and used a hacksaw from the toolbox to cut him into 12 pieces. I thought I would be grossed out, but it was actually kind of exciting. He said we had to do it this way for the spell to work. This was the last time that prick will ever hurt me or Mom. "Holy shit," said Stephen. "Adam actually killed the son of a bitch." "The spell," I blurted out. "Dan, what did the article say about which Bonnie? The one about her husband's death?" Dan's face contorted in thought. It said he was cut into pieces," he said, then realized what I was getting at. "Do you think Witch Bonnie was trying to protect herself, too?" "Well, it seems Adam had found out that Bonnie had killed her husband in this terrible way. And based on what Pastor Smythe said, it seemed that in the ancient world this was a common method of blood sacrifice, used to ensure protection." Dan and Stephen both looked at me as all the puzzle pieces fell into place. "Maybe when it is performed in a certain way, the gods protect the person invoking the spell. Bonnie must have figured this out and invoked protection for herself. And maybe she did it to protect the children too," Dan added. "But I didn't understand. Remember, Jeff, Bonnie told you that she had never hurt the children. So maybe it was her husband who was raping and killing them. She could have known it, but no one believed her." "Somehow, Adam knew the real story," I said. "Maybe there were more missing pages from the grimoire," Dan suggested. "The story must have inspired Adam to kill Destiny's father with the same ritual," I said. "A lot of good it did for Destiny," Stephen said, rolling his eyes. I thought of Clara Bonnie. Maybe she was just unfortunate like Destiny, born in the wrong place at the wrong time to the wrong parents. A lot of good the spell did for Bonnie, too. Stephen began reading another entry. June 16th. Today, I found out I am pregnant. I'm so embarrassed. I don't want anyone to find out about it. My baby will be retarded and not have a father. Adam said he can take care of it. So the baby wasn't Adam's, I said. There's one more important entry in this journal, Stephen said. Okay, this one's from after she got put in the foster home. September 29th. I guess my dad finally got reported missing because the cops came around to the Levasseurs and asked me some questions, but I played dumb. I knew they would question Adam if they knew we were seeing each other, so I went to Adam's house this afternoon and told him we needed to stop seeing each other until this blew over. We both cried. I think he agreed that it needed to be done. We agreed that I should start dating someone else, to take any attention off him. I know we'll be together again someday. Stephen looked up from the page, stunned again into silence. Dan said, Wasn't this right around the time you and Destiny started? But his voice trailed off. Yes, Stephen said, looking sick. I realized that he now knew what it felt like to be used. Go to this year, I said, trying to change the subject. See what she had to say about Adam's suicide. Dan poked around in the box and found the latest journal that Destiny had kept. It felt weird reading about my friends after they died. Here we had discovered a side to them that we never knew about. Another sticky note led us to the next clue. August 13th. Today, Adam left for Woodstock. I told him that the detectives had come around again asking questions about Dad, and that they'd asked about him, too. Why the hell won't they just leave him alone? I guess they talked to my mom, and she mentioned that we dated. Adam didn't seem worried, though. He said it would all be over shortly. I asked him not to go, but he said he had to. He looked happy. I promised I would never tell on him. I guess the suits at Adams weren't really from the FBI, Stephen said, seeming a bit disappointed. They were just detectives investigating a murder. My sister never said they were from the FBI, Dan said, hoping to redeem his sister's good name. Stephen gave him an evil look. What? Dan said, defensively. I'm only clarifying. Steve read the next entry. August 16th. Adam killed himself today. The stupid son of a bitch. Why would he do this to me? My foster parents are sending me to my aunt's. I don't want to live in a world without him. We were all silent. Why the hell wouldn't she tell us this? Stephen said. Not like I would care. I gave Stephen a you-know-better look. She was protecting Adam, Dan responded quickly. So we would too, Stephen said. Here's how I see it, I said, beginning to include the new information to my understanding of what took place. Adam knew the cops were starting to suspect his role in Destiny's father's murder, so he killed himself before he was taken into custody. I looked at Stephen and Dan, who were hanging on my words. Adam figured that the police would find a suicide note, so he scrawled the pentacle into the dirt, knowing that we would research it and follow the trail back to Bonnie and make the connection. Stephen looked up. But why not just mail us a note explaining everything? Plausible deniability, I guess, I said. If he sends us a note confessing to the murder, he gets us involved. This way, if we get questioned, we don't have to lie. I would have lied for him, Stephen said. We all would have, said Dan. Son of a bitch, I yelled, throwing the diary across the room. Stephen and Dan looked at me stunned. Why couldn't he just tell us? If we had any idea how much he'd meant to Destiny, we could have been there for her. Adam never realized how much his death would affect Destiny, said Dan. He could have never imagined that she would kill herself. I retrieved the journal from where I'd thrown it, thinking of how just a few days before, Destiny had held this same notebook in her hand. The death of a loved one is a strange experience. One moment they're in your life, and the next moment they're gone. You eventually adapt, but every time someone dies, the process of adaptation begins all over again, and it never gets easier. As I picked up the book, a small piece of paper fell out. It was a piece of notebook paper folded neatly. I unfolded and flattened it out. Written hurriedly at the top was yesterday's date. I read it aloud. August 22nd. I told Betty to give this box to you guys. Now you know our secret. I cannot live in a world without Adam. I love you guys. You're the only family I ever really had. Love in death. Destiny. That was it. Now we knew. All of the mysterious demons and haunting similarities were from our friend's past. The spell ended in disaster for whoever performed it. I did not want to read from the notebooks any more. None of us did. After we packed up Destiny's diaries, we decided to go down to the place where it had all began, the spot where Adam had, days earlier, taken his own life. We burned the box and the diaries in the same fire that Adam had sat next to when he killed himself. As I left the clearing that day, I thought about the afterlife. I remembered something that Pastor Smythe had always said. In the Old Testament view of hell or Sheol, the afterlife was just a waiting room. The righteous lived with God, the unrighteous didn't. It was as simple as that. Hell was not the place of torment that many people believed it to be. It was just a waiting room. I walked out of the woods and stood between Dan and Stephen, facing the homemade cross that Mikey had made. We stared at the cross solemnly. Dirt and pine needles had begun to cover the memorial. We had been through a lot over the last week. I felt like a person who had just awoken from a bad dream, only to find out that reality was far worse than any nightmare. As we walked up the road to Dan's car, the sun was shining. We walked past Adam's house, but we could hear no cries from inside. Miriam, as she began to adjust to life without her eldest son, was doing all right. As I looked back over the spot where Adam had committed suicide, something struck me. Light blue smoke began to bellow from the top of the tree line. I smiled and began laughing under my breath. I had been through too much this week to even care. The only thing I knew was that things could not and should not continue the way they had been. I finally had enough. I turned around and got into the car where Dan and Stephen were waiting for me. I looked out the window and said, "Dan, drop me off at Lowell General. I'm going into rehab." So that's the story behind why I'm here. I told the group of rehabilitating drug addicts and alcoholics who were all gathered in the plush living room at Baldpate Hospital. The group therapist stared at me in disbelief. "Well, Jeff, if you're not ready to share just yet, that's all right," she said. "What the hell are you talking about?" I said. She just nodded her head. "You know what I mean," she said. Just then a voice came in over the public address system, announcing that it was time for medication. All patients needing methadone should head to the nurse's window. I smiled widely. "Well," I told the therapist, "I would love to continue this conversation, but I've got to go." And with that I continued upon a journey of a different sort. I swear to God that this has been an honest account of what happened during the summer when Adam took his own life. You can choose to believe me or not. What the hell do I care?